Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm going to do a quick white balance if that's okay.
We'll sit here for now.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay, I think we can, if my colleagues tell me it's true, we can get the evening underway. Are we ready, folks? Kate, Ariel, can I get things underway? Yes? Okay. So, thank you everybody for being here and joining us. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma and Columbia Journalism School to the World Room here, and to from child refugees to climate change, global challenges in an age of nationalism. This is a conversation with Her Excellency María Fernanda Espinosa Garcés, who we are honored, pleased, and delighted to have here. This is her first public appearance since coming to the end of her term as UN General Assembly President. I'll say more about her in a few minutes, but it's an unusual privilege to be engaging with a world leader on such a wide range of issues. We're here today at an extraordinary moment. Young people in this city and around the world have gone out on strike today in protest of worldwide inaction on climate change. And indeed, next week, a global summit on climate change is going to convene, thanks in part to President Espinosa's efforts at the UN. And at the same time, here at Columbia Journalism School, some 30 journalists from around the world who are among you in this room now have been convening for a 4-day intensive set of discussions on covering children, refugees, and migration, trying to look at the intersection of the first years of life and the global crisis of refugees and migration that is sweeping our planet, is tied into climate change, conflict, human rights, corruption, many other issues, and is one of the defining issues of our time. That's the context for this conversation. This conversation is a keynote of that event. It's the only public event in what is otherwise a closed conversation among journalists, scientists, and policymakers. It's the third, and I need to say this is workshop, and tonight's event is the third in a series of programs on reporting issues in the first years of life that we at the Dart Center have been putting on for the last couple of years through the generous support of 4 foundations who are also here tonight. I need to name them and acknowledge them because they took a big risk in supporting this work. The Bernard van Leer Foundation of the Netherlands, the Jacobs Foundation of Switzerland, the Maria Cecilia Soto Vigidal Foundation of Brazil, and the Two Lilies Foundation, the Two Lilies Fund of the United States. This is a global effort to improve globally the reporting on early childhood and its intersection with critical issues like refugees and climate. These are foundations that promote global awareness of early childhood development, that fund research in this area, but they have not until now been supporters of journalists and journalism. So we are moved and delighted that they've made a multi-year commitment that has brought all of us together and is changing the way reporting is done. Let me say a little bit about the evening, and then I want to introduce one of my colleagues who will have a few words to say, and then we'll come back. This, as I said, will be a conversation with President Espinosa and with Deborah Amos, a friend and colleague who is the International Affairs Correspondent for National Public Radio. I really think of her job as just all things global. And I'll say more about her in a few minutes, but she'll begin the conversation with President Espinosa, and then there'll be time for a conversation with all of you in the room. It'll be a chance to look at how some of these issues intersect collide to look back on an extraordinary year for the UN General Assembly and for President Espinosa, and perhaps to forecast forward where public attention needs to go on some of these important issues. To get things going, I'd like to introduce one of our key partners in this. Michael Feigelson. Mike is the executive director of the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, and like all four of our foundation funders, is not just a funder, but is a key authority, instigator, disseminator of knowledge, and advocate. Mike, come up and take us where we need to go.
So think of Bruce as the personification of a journalist, and think of me as the personification of a baby. I'm serious. We are a foundation that's been working on early childhood development for 70 years, and that's really about the lives of babies and toddlers and the men and women who take care of them. And I was walking in, I saw someone with a placard over there. Someone was at the climate strike. I think it's you guys, no? So I wanted to, what does it say? What is the? Yeah. Your piece of dirt gives pain to the earth. So I want to do something slightly unorthodox in recognition of the climate strike, and you'll understand soon why. But I'm going to ask everybody to stand up for a second. And I'm going to ask you to breathe with me. So first, just breathe normally. So this is the way an adult at rest breathes. Now I want you to double the pace. Double the pace. This is more or less how a 12-year-old breathes at rest. Now I want you to double again, so 4 times at the beginning. This is how a baby breathes. Now you can sit down. 95% of the children in the world are breathing air that is below what the World Health Organization says is okay. Babies and toddlers are taking in 4 times what you and I take. And what you also may not know is the air is actually dirtier the closer you get to the ground. So the air they breathe is dirtier. Think about a child of 3 years, about 95 centimeters, is literally looking into the exhaust pipe of a car. When I was looking at the pictures of the climate strike, which is wonderful, what was noticeable to me are where are the parents, where are the strollers? Now it's probably because the employers didn't let them take off from work to go to the strike, but these are some of the people who are most affected by coal and cars and fossil fuels and the way it's making the air we breathe dirty. And it's not just affecting them today. We know, and the journalists are learning, how this affects their brains and their lungs and their future. But when we talk about climate and we talk about the crisis, we often forget what it looks like from a baby's point of view. We also know that climate is one of the drivers of what we expect to be unprecedented forced migration. People fleeing from their homes, not because they want to, but because they have to. And today, the UN Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimates just above 130 million people in need of humanitarian protection support, about half forcibly displaced. 5 million of those are pregnant women. So 5 million of them are going to have a baby in the next 9 months. 22 million are children under 5 going through the most important developmental period of their life. And we don't actually know how many, but probably around 33 million are men and women who are taking care of them every day. So this group of people is not a marginal stakeholder to this crisis. They're a central one. And think again about your breath. Think about how a child breathes when they have to flee, when they're afraid, when they feel this kind of angst, and what we need to do to give them calm. The point that I want to make is these enormous issues that are so important are affecting babies, toddlers, the men and women who take care of them every day, probably more than anybody else. And yet when we talk about these stories, we often forget them because they're so small. What gives me great hope and great pleasure is we have the opportunity to hear from a world leader who doesn't do that, who doesn't forget about them, who does see these issues from the vantage point of a baby, of a toddler, of a new mother, of a new father, and has been bringing this message already to her community and to the world. So, estamos muy felices, agradecidos de tenerle con nosotros, pero más que eso, tenerla en el puesto que ha estado y poder ver el liderazgo que has desempeñado y esperamos seguir trabajando juntos en el futuro. Gracias. Thank you.
Okay, let me just do the quick formal introductions and then we'll get this show on the road. And thank you, Mike, that was really eloquent and set the stage exactly right. First, since there are some of you here who do not know the DART Center, your host tonight is the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. We are a project of Columbia Journalism School, now in its 20th year, convening journalists, scientists, clinicians, researchers to inform, prepare, train, and shape and improve reporting on violence, conflict, and tragedy around the world. Issues ranging from street crime, intimate partner violence, gender violence, up to war and international human rights. We are a global project. We have trained journalists in at least 42 countries. We have full-time offices in Europe and the Asia Pacific, but we are based here at Columbia Journalism School. And as I explained earlier, this talk tonight is part of a multi-year initiative to prepare journalists for covering how issues of trauma and resilience play out in the first years of life and play out in the lives of those who are responsible for children and care for them. Her Excellency María Fernanda Espinosa Garcés is the president of the 73rd session of the General Assembly, which just closed, so she's just gone down the exit ramp, but is still President Espinosa, as far as we are concerned. And she has more than 20 years of multilateral experience in international negotiations, peace, security, defense, disarmament, human rights, indigenous peoples, gender equality, sustainable development, environment, biodiversity, climate change, and multilateral cooperation. She's served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ecuador twice, the Minister of National Defense, and Coordinating Minister of Natural and Cultural Heritage. Such an extraordinarily rich range of portfolios is not your typical politician, right? President Espinosa is also a poet, winner of her country's highest award for poetry, and did early work combining scientific and ethnographic research on indigenous communities. So she brings to the world of politics and policy and international peace and development an exceptionally broad and humane set of interests and commitments that I hope will inform our conversation tonight. Deborah Amos is international correspondent for NPR, and most of you know that her reports can be heard on NPR's Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. She has won so many awards for her broadcast coverage, I'm not even going to begin to list them. I'll begin to list them because they include the DuPont Award from this school, the Robert F. Kennedy Award for her reporting on refugees and so many others. And she's also the Ferris Professor of Journalism at Princeton, where she is currently teaching a course on covering migration and refugees. I am now going to get out of the way and let you two take it from here. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. So the format for tonight is we are going to have a conversation, questions and answers for about 25 minutes, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you. And because we're moving very quickly, we just have an hour to do all of these things. When we get to the questions from the audience, I'm going to ask that we do 2 at a time. It just moves things along and we get more in. So let's do it that way when we get there. So I'm going to set my watch, and 25 minutes from now, I'm going to turn it over to you. I want to start, we've been talking about numbers, how many breaths, I'm feeling that. I don't know what that was, but. Dirty air. Yes, it felt like dirty air, yeah. There's a lot of ways that you can look at a generation. Half of all refugees are children, that's 29 million, half of that are kids. 50 million children who have been displaced forcibly for economic reasons, global. It's as big as a country. It's certainly bigger than many states in the United States. So my question just to open this discussion is, how do we think about this generation, which it is, and have we failed them at the international level?
Well, I think, first of all, let me acknowledge our hosts today, if you allow me, Deborah. I know that we have short time, but the Columbia Journalism School, I have to acknowledge the Dart Center and Bruce for a very generous introduction, to acknowledge Michael and your foundation. That I was really, I didn't know that the Bernard Van Leer Foundation has worked on early childhood development for 70 years, 70. So that's almost the age of the United Nations. So that's admirable. So thank you for that. And acknowledge my dear sister and companion of dreams, Cecilia Bach, as well. In a big way, I'm here, because of her. So thank you, and thank you all. It is a privilege to be here. You were saying how we failed, the current generation. And I would say that who has failed the current generation? And I think it is a collective responsibility. I often hear, but the UN is just, a talk shop. What is that you're doing to resolve all the problems around the world? And I keep asking back, the UN is us. The UN are not only the governments. The UN is also civil society, youth organizations, women's groups, and we're all part of an international community. And what strikes me, Deborah, is that it's unbelievable, but we do have the knowledge. It's not that we do not know. We have the technologies. We know how to do it better, and yet we don't. So what comes in between? And I have to say that it's a combination of things. It is not a simple answer. It's very easy to say, it's because the UN is not working, or whatever, or X or Y government. I think that it's more profound than that. And what I would say, for example, it's the need for stronger global leadership, for collective action, and shared responsibilities. And collective action meaning, how is that we organize ourselves to take care of our global commons? And that includes the atmosphere, and that includes our oceans, our biological diversity, but also an important public good, which is peace and security. So we all have, it's a scalable responsibility on this, but we do have, and the media, journalists, have a big stake here, because, they are the ones who translate what is happening in a way for public opinion. And when I had to choose, because every session at the UN, you have to choose a theme, the theme I chose for this year was to make the United Nations relevant for all. And every day during my tenure, I thought about the people in need, and sometimes I felt so frustrated. It also has to do not only with global leadership, but also a word in English that is very strong, and then you understand it's self-interest, but that's not the word I wanted to refer to, but greed. Greed is the word.
There is some leadership. It's probably not the kind that you like to see. We now have a race to the bottom in terms of, and there's been leaders who learn from each other and how to do that. And certainly that has been the case when it comes to refugee resettlement. The Trump administration just might zero out an American program this year. As a matter of fact, it's likely that they will. I was looking at UN documents on refugees, and there's a lot of talk about durable solutions. If there's no resettlement, how can there be durable solutions for people? If that door shuts, if we don't have refugee resettlement in the numbers that we've seen in my lifetime, then what?
Well, I think that, the history of humanity has been, I know that this is a quote that I got from somewhere, and I'm very responsible because I cannot put the name on the quote, but it's so true.
Because you're not a journalist.
Yes, but in a way I come from academia, and you're not supposed to quote without knowing who, but this is very, very appropriate here. The history of humanity is, in a way, the history of war, of religion, and of migration. Just look at century 1 until century 21. That has defined, in a way, and is defining very much so, the situation of unrest and crisis that we live on today, with differences, because here we have the issue of climate change. Thank you for taking part of the strike today. It is about climate change, it is about cybersecurity, it's about violent extremism and terrorism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, refugees is a category of migrants that live in a permanent crisis situation. Not only the crisis that push them away, but the crisis they live when they come to a new country or when they go to a new country. You're saying, well, the solution is resettlement. Yes, indeed. By my opinion, is that the solution is prevention first. Resettlement when they are already refugees. Unfortunately, the numbers are not good because the number of refugees are increasing. And I was trying to look at the data because data can be so complicated, but when you see the number of refugees, but pretty much the last numbers of UNCHR, the UN High Commissioner's Office for Refugees, I have deleted acronyms also from my language, which is very good, but the last report talks about 72, 73 million refugees, half of them children. And it's true. When they say children, it's like it simplifies reality. How about the babies? How about the mothers that are going to give birth? That was right on. And I've been to many refugee camps, especially this year. what about them? But the issue of resettlement, it's the ideal situation when they are already there. But we are really, I think, even worse on the prevention side. And the prevention side is, very tough, because it is about, combating climate change. And I'm not even using climate change anymore. It is a climate emergency, and it is a climate crisis that we're going through now. So if we do not tackle that, you will see, more than 90 million new people, just fleeing from their home countries because of climate-related disasters. So we're not doing good. And on the resettlement part, then you need one word again here, which is international solidarity, that unfortunately one of the deficits we're facing is the solidarity deficit worldwide.
You said that we know, and we do. We know, if you look at the reasons for the 1951 UN Convention, it was because everyone at the UN understood that if we didn't have some sort of resettlement plan, that Europe wouldn't make it. And it was done for that reason. It was to keep Europe stable, that there would be something that we could offer all these, displaced people after the Second World War. When I look around now, I've been talking about this today, the Al-Hol camp, where it's the kids of the ISIS fighters, and no one is there. There's not UNHCR, not UNICEF, not all of the children's organizations, and it's terrifying to think about how those children are growing up. But we also know this for thousands of children who are refugees now. Is there anyone at the UN that says, gee, it would be a bad idea to have a generation of, radicalized children? Or is it just something that people find easier to ignore?
Well, I think first, I think it's very important to make the difference between migrants and refugees and internally displaced persons, because I think that they require a different kind of protection. Everything is about the human rights of these people to start with, no? But then there are different reasons, different motives. For example, yesterday or the day before yesterday, new data came out on migrants, 272 million migrants. And that includes even, university students that go from one place to the other. Others that migrate because of a financial crisis and they want better opportunities. But when you look at internally displaced persons, it's because there is a major crisis or situation that pushes them to leave a country. And the refugees is an international protection status. And sometimes we get a little bit confused. When a country grants an international protection status to a person, to a baby, to a child, it has responsibilities over these people. And that includes education, shelter, food, etc., etc., etc. Education is central there because of that, because of potential radicalization, because of feeling marginalized, isolated. I have a few numbers here that I would like to share with you, but for example, refugee enrollment in primary school is 63%, 24% for secondary school, and higher education, 3%. And these are it's information of the new report that came a few months ago. So this is really not right.
No, it's pretty terrible.
It's terrible. And it means, and here we have to also be careful about stigmatizing young refugees, because it is not the refugees that then it automatically, because they didn't go to school, they didn't have the opportunities, then they automatically become radicalized. And I think we should be very careful about the narrative about refugees and migrants, for that matter. So these are human beings. They are entitled to their fundamental rights and their dignity. And refugees in particular, they have another layer of protection because they have a refugee status, because they're fleeing or escaping from a particular crisis situation. And that includes, of course, climate change, major climate-related disasters. And we have hundreds of examples of that. A few months ago, I went to Chad, where there are 7 million internally displaced persons. And it is the sad combination between the incredible effects of climate change, because Lake Chad was the food provider area. It's and you know better than I do. You perhaps know. Some of you perhaps have covered the Lake Chad and the Sahel crisis. You know better, but you see what are the opportunities, and unfortunately, young people connected to the Lake Chad crisis are also now become a part of Boko Haram, because it's the only way that they can provide for food and protection for their own families. So it is complicated, but it is, again, the blaming and shaming. I think that we have to be a little careful. It's the responsibility of the governments of that area of West Africa, of the inability of the international community to respond and overcome the solidarity deficit, of the humanitarian response capacity that we have. It's all of the above. I mean, it's everything together.
I mean, we are both, I think, in some ways describing a world system now where, the richer companies are putting up the drawbridge, and people who come from places that have climate change and conflict are trying to get in. And what we've seen is a step up in deterrence policies. The idea is that if you make it tough enough that people will just stay where they are. Well, what happens instead, and this is statistically proven, is they take even more dangerous routes. If you block off the kind of dangerous ones, they'll take the really dangerous ones. They won't go home. Because at the end of the day, what's behind them is worse than what's in front of them. And that's the rule for migrants and refugees and everybody who flees. And you can't really use deterrence. So, yet again, I mean, I think we both are coming to the sort of description of, it's not going well. So I'm going to ask you about that. As you, as the head of the UN General Assembly, are talking to states about how they want to do this. There's no logic to these deterrence campaigns. You just force people into taking bigger risks. Is there talk at the UN of sort of mitigating some of those dangers?
Well, I think, again, here there are perhaps three things. This year, in spite of the difficulties, we were able to adopt two very important instruments, the Global Compact on Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees. Both are, I would say, like blueprints on policy and cooperation guidance for countries, but for all of them, it is about burden sharing and co-responsibility between countries of origin, of transit, and destination. And I think both instruments provide that, a platform, a reference point to encourage cooperation, exchange, good practices, etc. So, but that this is written in paper. Now the main challenge is how is that we put in practice, we implement and we deliver on both compacts, the one on migration and the one on refugees. And I think that the dialogue is there. And I think that this dialogue is becoming more and more difficult because unfortunately we are experiencing a rise in nationalist sentiment, of xenophobia, of intolerance that is happening now and today. And for me, it's very difficult to understand that the issue of migration, for example, it's becoming one of the, I don't know if you use that word in English, but determinants for national elections, for example. And it is unbelievable that countries that were the highest numbers of their own people had to leave their own countries during the Second World War. I was, a few months ago, I was in the camp in Poland. Oh, I forgot now. Auschwitz, how can I forget? But I was in Auschwitz. If it wasn't because the solidarity of the entire world that received, the Jewish people, just escaping from assassination and death, they came to this country. They came to my country. They went everywhere, and they were well received. And unfortunately, these same countries did not learn the lesson, because now there is this strong reemergence of very strong nationalism. And the truth is that when you tell your people public opinion, and when you're a politician, we have to take care of our own national interest, our people first. It so happens that national interest now and today is so much connected with global interest, and global transboundary well-being of people. And perhaps if we have time, there is a project that I really see with great hope, which is this new development project for the Northern Triangle in Central America and Mexico, that basically took the Global Compact on Migration and translated into a very strong prevention project, where all the presidents got together and agreed on very key issues to prevent migration, especially dangerous migration in the Northern Triangle. That is a very ambitious yet very interesting project. In case you want to cover something, we also need good news, encouraging news. The Northern Triangle project, under the leadership of Mexico, is a very interesting project to look at. And all the assistance and the technical support is coming from ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UN.
You have a group of journalists in this room, and nobody likes anything better when you're a journalist is to be given a good story. I'm going to have one more short question before I open it up, and that is this. Do you think that we could open up the 1951 convention and add climate change? Do you think that would be a good idea?
Well, unfortunately, the 1951 convention does not have the key countries as signatories. So we need more countries to sign to the 51 convention. But if we were to reopen the convention, of course, climate change should be at the core and center of the convention.
But do you think you could get that
that's
passed
for sure.
At the UN?
Not right now, not today, and that's why we came out with the Global Compact on Refugees, which I think is very contemporary and and really translate what are the main drivers for refugees. And you don't need to be a magician to know that it's always conflict and crisis related. If you ask here, all the journalists here, who in his or her right mind would leave home, family, belongings, the loved ones, and to just undertake an adventure that you don't know where it's going to lead you, and sometimes children and pregnant women? As humans, we do that because we want to? We like adventure? No. So our only responsibility is to make sure that migration is safe, regular, and organized, and that there is a global solidarity compact to understand that this movement of people is happening, but not now and today. It has happened since the origins of human society. So I think we need to get our act together. And here, one of the main dangers is human trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime. And 73% of the victims of human trafficking are women and girls. And here, another story. Look from the perspective of the babies. That it really got me here, so thank you for that. But also from the perspective of women and girls. Very much so. Especially when you are dealing with human trafficking.
Okay, I'm going to open this up. And we're going to do 2 questions at a time. Pink in the front. And there's, you want him to come back to the microphone. Okay. You want to walk back? Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ilgin Yorulmaz. I'm a freelance journalist from Turkey, and welcome to Colombia. I joined the global climate strike today as a concerned parent, and I met an Ecuadorian gentleman in his 50s from Milagro, and his banner read, Ingenio Valdez is a sugar plant located in the middle of our city, and it's killing us with its contamination. So this was really interesting for me because here was this Ecuadorian gentleman protesting in New York City. Now, Ecuador is a developing country and it needs, obviously, all the resources. But how can the governments and institutions like the UN ensure that a country can attain economic development without sacrificing its natural resources and its environments? I think it's the age-old dilemma that I'm asking, and a very short answer would be appreciated. Thank you.
And name, please.
Good evening. Madam Espinosa, do you think we should have a convention?
Name.
Oh, my name is Adeshewa Josh. Do you think we should have a convention on for asylum seekers? What are the rules? What do they enjoy? I mean, what's the process? Because there's migrants and there is refugees. And the process in between, it takes seeking asylum. What are the rules? Because obviously, it changes with every state.
Okay.
Well, on the first question regarding my dear brother from Milagro, and regarding your question on economic models, there are alternatives. There are alternatives, plenty. Just read any description of the green economy and the global Green New Deal that I am working with a group of people. So it can be done, but it cannot be done by magic. There is a problem, and I have to be very honest with you. There is a problem on the political cycles of countries and politicians, the kind of time frames that you have, and the time cycles of nature and the environment. And usually there is a disconnect between political cycles and environmental and nature cycles as well. So the idea is to connect the two time cycles and to make them coincide. And I would be, I wouldn't be telling the truth if I said it can be done. It's easy. It is difficult. It is a structural change in the way the Global South especially build the economies, but there are alternatives. It can be done. It is called the green economy. On the second question, there is a refugee convention. It's the 1951 Vienna Convention on Refugees. I think it has to be signed by more countries. Now I don't have the numbers. And the Asylum Convention, it's the Caracas Convention on Asylum. And there is already a convention. Oh, I was looking, okay, you're there. So there are, the legal frameworks are there. They have to be translated into national policies. they have to be translated also in the way countries, receiving countries behave, but also countries of origin and transit. In the case of my country, the right of asylum and the right of refugees not only comply with both conventions, the Caracas Convention and the Vienna Convention, but also we have put the rights for refugees and asylum seekers in our constitution and in our human mobility law. We don't call people from different origins foreigners or strangers. We call them people in human mobility, and we have used this category, so it can be done.
If you go to the microphone. I'll have two questions.
Okay. I'm too short for this. Hi, my name is Carol Moreno. I'm from Brazil. And I wanted to ask, in your time as president of the United Nations General Assembly, what was the thing that you did that was the best thing that you did there that you're most proud of? And what did you wish you could have done but didn't have time or didn't manage to do?
Second question.
My name is Pearl Matibi. I'm from Zimbabwe. First of all, I want to thank you for having had this platform and coming to engage on these issues, because you're a woman and women very infrequently get this platform. I also want to thank you for bringing up the question, a couple of issues you mentioned, climate change, xenophobia, the issue on migration. What I'm asking you is, in your time, during your tenure, if you looked, for instance, at the SADC region, Cyclone Idai happened during your tenure. The xenophobia going on currently right now in South Africa was also happening prior to your leaving your office on Monday. What country or which countries in the SADC regions kept you up at night and why?
Those are two good questions.
Excellent. Question of something that I feel proud of. Perhaps two things. Sometimes, as women, we shouldn't be humble because say, I don't know what I did, but I can tell you two things, two things. One is that I eradicated single-use plastics from the UN. And I'm very proud of that. Why? Because my first meeting with the management of the UN when I arrived, I met with the Undersecretary for Management, et cetera, and I said, well, we cannot afford, being a, full-fledged single-use plastic place. The United Nations, we receive people from all over. This cannot happen. And basically the response I got, it cannot be done because of our procurement contracts, because of our catering system, because of I said, I will not take no for an answer. And in June 2019, we were able to completely eliminate single-use plastics from the UN headquarters, but also from our offices in Geneva, in Vienna, in Nairobi. So that is something that I feel proud of. And this is going to be good for our oceans and good to combat the climate crisis in a way.
Can you put out a laundry list of how you did it?
Oh, yeah, but then I don't have the time because, but I had, my legal advisors look at the contracts that were an obstacle, and we went through a very tough negotiation process with the procurement systems. But I also got the member states and the Secretary General to back me and to put pressure. That helps also. But yes, and the number two thing that I feel proud of, I worked this year very much on women in power, to encourage young women to be in politics and to actively participate in decision making, because there the numbers are not right. In 74 years of history of the United Nations, I'm only the fourth woman on, having the privilege to preside over the General Assembly, which is the parliament of humanity in a way. And I'm only and very proud to say the first Latin American and Caribbean woman. And if you look at parliaments around the world, the big companies everywhere, We are 50% of the world's population, and then the numbers are not right. 75% of the parliamentarians worldwide are still men. So I work on that. I organized the first ever meeting of female heads of state and government. There are 20 of them out of 193. They came and they mentored young female leaders in New York. So I worked during the year to make sure that the UN also had gender parity. Every panel, every ministerial level event, everything we did was about gender parity. My cabinet was 60% women. The co-facilitators, the mediators on the negotiation processes at the UN, 54% women and men. So I did that intentionally. It was a big cross-cutting issue of my presidency. I also feel proud of that, especially on the mentoring and encouragement part for young women leaders. That's the number 2. And you said about disappointments or challenges. I think that the architecture of the UN is extremely complex. It's a huge elephant. And we are starting a reform process internally. And I would have liked to see the reform going faster. And we have a great leader. We have a great Secretary General. So I hope that it's going to really, that we are going to deliver. I mean, we need to be an organization that is more accountable, more transparent, more efficient. And we really do need to walk the talk in a way. So the question about SADC, about South Africa, about xenophobia, and if I didn't sleep at night, I didn't sleep many nights. Because we also had recently, we saw what happened in Sri Lanka and Christchurch, in the synagogue in California, what happened in the Mediterranean this summer. Many nights. And the issue is that it is a question that I liked very much. And perhaps if you go to the website, I would really like to share with you my closing statement as president on Monday. And basically what I said is that we cannot lose our capacity of feeling pain for others. And sometimes when you are in negotiations and running from one place to the other and having the political declaration ready and organizing 5 summit level that starting tomorrow at UN headquarters, you lose sight and you forget why is that you're there. And your capacity to just not be connected to the people that you're there to represent, it's something that I am very afraid of. So basically my call was not to be indifferent. And this saying is just, there is a Nobel Prize. Again, I don't remember the name, but I remember the quote. When he said, it is a he, that the opposite of hate, the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And I think that every day I reminded myself that. And every day I remembered, for example, the victims of Boko Haram that I met in Chad, the internally displaced women in Nigeria. I thought about them, and I do think about them, because we cannot trivialize pain. And you're experts in covering areas of conflict and crisis. And please do not lose your capacity of feeling pain and solidarity for others. And sometimes this is not good for a politician, but I'm not embarrassed to say I am a female politician, but I am also a poet.
Two more questions. Let's have you.
Good evening. My name is Fatiha Ayat. I am 7 years old and an activist for rights of migrant children. I have delivered speech around different sessions in the United Nations to stop child abuse, gender discrimination, and domestic violence. I have raised my voice to make everyone conscious about the effects of global warming and climate change to the migrant children. Today, I actually have a comment, not a question.
We need a question, sweetie.
No, but I would like to listen to your comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Today, I would like to draw your kind notice into an important topic. Yes, in today's world, children are escaping from their countries with their families. But that is not always for political reasons. Climate-caused refugee children is also rapidly increasing. It is estimated that by 2050, around 100 million children will be at risk to leave their homes as a result of deforestation, desertification, sea level rising, and extreme weather conditions. I'm sure you all know that recently last month, Hurricane Dorian has struck Hawaii, has struck Bahamas and made a lot of children become refugees in Bahama and in the other islands. So time has come to integrate an age perspective by putting into the climate change agenda, by putting children into the center of design and decision making. Age-sensitive policies must be identified and prioritized to help build resilience to climate-induced disasters. So my plea to you is that please take action now. This is your generation who will have to act. My generation cannot afford this climate challenge when we will be grown up, because that will be too late to react. I know you are trying, but I don't think that's really hard enough. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for your very, very powerful words. And when I was asked what I feel proud of is I also made sure that the voices of children and young people and women were present in everything we did and organized this year. So, of course, more than speaking, I think that we should learn how to listen more and better. And I listened to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next two questions.
Hello, I'm Jane McCall-Politi on the NGO Committee on Migration. It's a pleasure to be here. I was thinking about the tension between sovereignty and human rights, and thinking in particular of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The child has a right to access to basic services, education, healthcare, and the littlest children in particular have an incredible need to have early childhood development programs, early childhood development, which is education and care. And the Global Compact for Migration, Global Compact on Refugees had early childhood development written into them. But how do we push member states to resolve this tension between sovereignty and human rights in order to recognize and get them to implement the critical services that these little children need for their future?
Oh, we're going to do two questions.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. So, I think we already met in the United Nations high-level meeting for universal health coverage, the civil society hearing a few months back, and I told you the same thing. We need more women in positions of leadership, and we are very proud of you, porque también soy Latino. So thank you for your kind words that you leave us today. My question is, as a medical doctor who works providing humanitarian medical assistance in populations living under extreme marginalization, key vulnerable populations such as migrants or refugees. In Mexico and the southern border, I've been asked as part of the political declaration on tuberculosis from last year's HLM to make some screenings for the patients or the people that try to cross to my country. So now that you bring this comment on what Mexico is doing with El Salvador, providing money and economic assistance for Guatemala so that they do not cross the border, I think they are also making us as civil society push them away, and the barrier here will be tuberculosis. I fear that we will fall into discrimination and stigma, and we are, as civil society, a tool to stop them from passing. What can we do as civil society to prevent this from happening?
Well, thank you. First, the first question between, the tension between human rights and sovereignty. I think it is easier to explain the false dichotomy between globalization, collective action, and sovereignty. But the dichotomy between sovereignty and human rights, it's not acceptable, because human rights have to be protected, exercised, and complied with in every corner of this planet. It has to be with the dignity of people wherever they are. And we do have international instruments. The international human rights architecture it's very extensive. So there is no either or there. What I have to perhaps say is something that I learned when I was studying the issues of early childhood. I have to acknowledge that I'm not an expert, but I am interested in basically when there is a crisis situation, you have the humanitarian architecture of the UN operating. We are the first in arriving into a disaster area, for example, to a conflict area, etc., at the Bahamas or wherever, or Mozambique, wherever it's needed. But I think that the protocols for humanitarian assistance, it is understandable. It is about shelter, it is about food, and then when you have an established group, for example, of refugees, then the questions about education, health, come as an afterthought. What I have learned is that in the humanitarian responses, you have to factor in early childhood services. And that is extremely important, because it's a win-win. It's the best investment for refugee babies. And that has to be part of the package, the natural thing to do. And I know it's not easy. I know it's not there, but it has to happen. It was a short question, long answer, sorry. And your question about the issue of tuberculosis and other diseases and migration. I think that what is one of the key issues. And if you follow the negotiations of the Universal Health Coverage Political Declaration, you know that there were countries that were very worried about providing health services to migrants. That is one of the issues that are still, being part of the conversation. In my opinion, universal health coverage should be applied 100% to people on the move, because here we're talking about 272 million people, and we're talking about how many millions of children and babies. This political declaration, at the end, we were able to make it happen. So it's going to be adopted by heads of state on Monday, but it wasn't an easy process. And if you follow, you know what I'm talking about, and And I know also the situation in the Northern Triangle is not only Mexico and Guatemala, it is El Salvador and Honduras. It is a regional project, not only looking at health, but basically looking at conflict, violence, and poverty together. And I think it's interesting and promising.
Thank you.
2 more questions.
Hello, my name is Sean Shokumbi, and I have a consulting firm currently that's focused on economic advancement for people who are in crisis situations. And I know a lot of the conversation has been around or centered around children, but I'm also thinking about the parents and their ability to build from scratch and the ability to pass something on to their children and the next generation to come. So my question for you is, how do we make more intentional use of their waiting time at the refugee camps? I'll be going to Kenya, God willing, in November to address this issue. And for me, I come from the economic development side, so equipping them with actual skills that they can apply once they do reach their final destination, hopefully. How can we be more intentional about thinking about equipping parents with the ability to build something economically that they can pass on to their children, so that there's generational wealth being built, that this is not a situation that's going to repeat itself or create a cycle of poverty once they get there to their final place of destination?
Second question. This will be our last one.
Hi, my name is Sarah Saka, and I'm a graduate student at the policy school here. We talk about refugees a lot, but we tend to overlook Palestine refugees a lot in our conversation. Israel-Palestine is an ongoing conflict, but my question is, there is a lot of media from the UN around human rights transgressions and abuses by the Israeli occupation, Gaza refugees both in the West Bank, Lebanon, all around. What needs to be done for these to go beyond press releases and get the world to actually care about the world's largest open-air prison, refugees and refugee children? UNRWA is on the brink of collapse. There's funding crisis. So I'm wondering what can be done and what really needs to be done on the part of the UN and heads of state to actually take action. Thank you.
Yeah. First question on the refugees and the economic future of their families. I think that it has very much to do with the way that hosting countries operate the inclusion processes of refugees, and I have seen all models that work better than others, but I can tell you, firsthand about my own country, Ecuador. We have been the country that hosts the highest number of refugees in the Western Hemisphere for the past 20 years or so. And we do not have, in spite of, speaking about hundreds of thousands of Colombian refugees, we do not have refugee camps in Ecuador. The refugees, they are part of our society. They use our public services. They have work permits, and they have a normal life. In my opinion, that should be the model. But when you have fluxes, unexpected fluxes, because of a climate-related disasters, of a war, let's speak about Yemen or Syria, for example, then different arrangements have to be made. But self-reliance, for me, it's not only an economic right, but it is a psychological dignity right. And what we see is that investment in refugees is really very, very small. And basically the emphasis is on humanitarian responses to refugees, but very little about inclusion, about economic empowerment, about what comes after. And perhaps there we have a debt that we have with them. And that is a big question, of course. But there is no one size fits all, and there is no one single model of refugee attention and provision of basic services. Regarding the question on Palestine, I have lost count of the number of resolutions that we have passed at the Security Council, at the General Assembly, at the Human Rights Council regarding the situation of Palestinians. And yes, the response of the UN has been through UNRWA. You are very right. We had a problem. The problem is being addressed. There is an oversight committee that is looking at that. And of course, I think that we urgently need to re-energize UNRWA, which is a huge program that exists to provide care and attention basically to and access to health and education to Palestinian refugees. And we need the UN, and we all need to get that act together. I often refer to the Palestinian issue as one open wound of the multilateral system. We do have a huge debt with the Palestinian people. And I think that the only answer and the only possibility there, it's through dialogue. The need for a serious negotiation at the table. There is no military solution for that. It's a long conflict that requires a serious negotiation process, and I think that the UN needs to have a greater role. But you know, for dialogue and negotiation to happen, you need both sides to sit at the table, and it's not easy. It has not been easy.
María Fernanda, I think you could be the president of this General Assembly. I thank you so very, very much for being with us tonight. I'm sure that we all learned something, and thank you for the assignment.